Hello. Well, let's get this underway. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about,
I didn't mean it that way. Come on.
The process for all this. I mean, you made a short as I guess a type of a calling card to make the feature, and I think a lot of people are responding so well to a film like this. It seems very honest, and it's coming from, a really interesting place, and I think a lot of people can relate to many parts of, characters and things in this film. So maybe you could just tell us a bit about that.
Well, that was important for me from the beginning, that no matter what sort of road the script and then ultimately the movie took, was to try to tell stories, tell small stories that felt, that seemed to me that would be relatable to people in their own experiences. Part of the reason why I wanted to do this in the first place was basically out of a frustration of not seeing representations of the people that I knew and the sort of stories that I was either telling or was hearing from friends, and just not really seeing that in movies. And in terms of the whole I Want Your Love project, it kind of was born from, I do this other series called In Their Room, where I film guys alone in their bedrooms and I interview them about sex and intimacy and things like that. And it was really through doing that I was really, it became really clear to me that there were stories here, and there were like narratives here, and there was documentation of a community that wasn't being told. And so I basically wanted to take all of the little moments that I was filming in their room and then try and kind of coalesce it around a piece of fiction that was also very close to how I knew people to be living, gay guys to be living in San Francisco. And with so what happened was, NakedSword is a porn company in San Francisco, and they had seen my In Their Room series, and they were interested in working with me, and I had just finished the first draft of I Want Your Love, and they wanted to basically fund that, but before they would agree to do it, they wanted to have me do a short first to see if I could actually film sex and film people where it seemed natural. And so we did the short, and the short was actually, so how that actually came about was, it was the first draft of the script, and there was the scene between Jesse and his ex that ended up being played by Ben in the feature. And I was basically asked to make a self-contained short, like to take a scene from the original script and to massage it enough so it could be a self-contained thing. And so that's what we did, and they funded that, and that came out in 2010. And I felt part of the reason why you don't see that in the film is because Brendan is not in the film, but more importantly, because I just thought enough people had seen that short that it would be a mistake to try and recreate it. And so that's not in it, but it was a first draft of the script, and so like as it began getting fleshed out, it didn't make sense to be in there anyway. So that's kind of the evolution of the project. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Do we have some questions, comments?
The question was about authenticity and intimacy and what I need to do as a director to get to that place where there's that trust and to be able to make that happen. Well, part of it is, let's see, there are a couple of characters that I actually scripted for based on knowing them. One was Brontes and one was Jesse, and the other people were basically, we had auditions, and it was more of a case of finding people that fit the characters I had drawn, and then working with them, doing lots of workshopping, and not being like precious about anything, because that was important, is to not be precious about it. because it was important for me. Like the bottom line was to, as much as possible, I mean, these are non-actors and they're having sex and I'm asking them to act. I mean, it's a lot that I'm asking of these people. So it was really important for me to bring them in and to make them feel like they were part of this process too, which they were. And so what we would do is there would be scenes that I had scripted and then we would basically go through them together. We would workshop them. And I mean, I was very upfront from the beginning, like, tell me if this sounds bad, tell me if you would say it differently, let's just like play with it. But I would be taking notes as we were workshopping, so some of the scenes hardly changed, and some of them changed pretty drastically through workshopping. And so through that process, I was able to write down the ways in which these new people that I brought into the project, like how they said things, like tics they had, or sort of ways that they said things, and then just like taking things that they had said during the workshop. And then it became part of the new script. And because a lot of that was either from things that they had actually said previously, or from me observing the way that they said things, it was much easier for them to do multiple takes, I'm guessing, I think. Because they were basically, it was like massaged for them. It was custom designed for them in some ways. But in terms of the trust and all of that, you know, I was fortunate that I had had enough of these little projects prior to this that the guys who auditioned for this and the guys who ended up getting involved, I think they could see what my intentions were with the work that I was doing. And I think that there was like some excitement about trying to capture some authenticity and to capture a moment that's happening now, whatever that means. But like the moment that we're living in, and to show gay male intimacy in a way where it wasn't, it didn't have to be anything. It was just sort of like what it was. And the people who were getting involved with that appreciated that, and we understood each other. And so it wasn't a huge leap. I think if I had never done anything, and then I suddenly was doing this project, and I asked people, you know, to give naturalistic performances and to have sex, I think there would have been a lot of more trust building that had to happen on the front end than actually needed to happen.
Anyone? Questions? Comments?
Come on, there's a lot of you in here.
Got one at the back there, I think, first, and then
One of the questions I have, there seemed to be, there was like the sound. There was something interesting about the sound during the interview. Was that placed there specifically with us? Or was it heightened sound?
I mean, all of that's deliberate. I mean, with the way that we filmed it, it was very. So when any of that was filmed, when anything where there was dialogue was filmed, it was always very quiet. So anything that you hear is added and deliberate. So I don't know specifically what you're referring to, but I mean, like which scene or whatever. But yeah, I mean, whether it was music or it was sort of sounds from the room or from outside, it was always deliberate. And I mean, in a more general sense, I recorded sounds in San Francisco, and I wanted there to be small little nods here and there that were the San Francisco world that was sort of like surrounding them. So that was deliberate, but then also deliberate to sort of accentuate or to bring down different moments. So yeah.
How many shooting days did you use? What did you shoot this on?
We shot this on a Panasonic AF100, and we originally had 2 weeks of shooting, and then we knew wisely that we would need to do some pickup shots, and so we reserved basically almost a week, or not a week, 4 days. 4 days, many months down the road, so I could start editing it and then kind of get like a very, very rough cut and ask people like what's missing, what needs to be here. And so it was a little bit of, we ran out of time in the 2 weeks, and there were a couple of scenes that we still needed to film, but then we just kept it open a little bit further so we could have a little bit of wiggle room to film other things as need be.
All right, one last question. Or two.
Well, I mean, I've lived in San Francisco for like 14 years, and I've just, well, I mean, it's not even so much that. I would say that a lot of the reason why I got into filmmaking was I felt like I never saw myself, and I never saw like any sort of candid stories about who I was or who the people were that I knew. And I don't know that I want to get into a discussion about really like defining who those people are, but basically I felt like for a long time with gay film, there were very like specific boxes of types of films, types of stories, and types of bodies. It was important for me to show like, you know, maybe these guys are hot, but, or maybe they're not, maybe they are, but they're pretty like naturalistic bodies. They're not like muscled out, they're not like any particular thing like that. And so that was important to me, and it was just important to both show something that felt like it was a world that I knew, and also I wanted to also show bits of San Francisco that I knew. And I think if you've been to San Francisco, like there's lots of little pieces throughout this movie that pop out or like are there in kind of nuanced ways.
One last, did you have?
There were parts that were improvised. Let me think what scenes were improvised. Bronte's in the hallway at the party, not with Ben, but when he's talking to two people you don't see. That was improvised. And actually a lot of the first scene where they're sitting around the table and it's just like this shot that is just like Jesse, 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 and you don't see the people around him. A lot of that was improvised, but the way that worked was I gave different people very specific things that they should be talking about, and so we played with that. We basically like workshopped it as we were filming it, and so whenever you do see things that are improvised, that's usually the way that it worked, where I basically seeded something with people, but then let them sort of like do their thing and captured it. But that's a lot of how the, like I was saying earlier, that's a lot of how the script was revised, was through doing that, through having a scene where it was scripted and having them go through that and then allowing them or giving them space to just improvise within the points that they needed to hit and then writing that down. So it was a definite mix, kind of going back and forth. So,
Well, thanks, Travis.
All right, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here. Thanks for sticking around.